So ready? Oh, there is a question. There's another question. You spotted it, didn't you? Saw that Q word, didn't you? Okay, that Q word. So I have noticed, okay, wee bit of not so much reading. Okay, a huge key to success on the AP exam, okay, is reading the material. And I'm starting to see a little bit of slippage on that. So I'm going to start doing some things to encourage that a little bit more. So next time, there will be a quiz. Now I'm going to be very pointed exactly as to what I want you to look at for this quiz. In chapter 16, it's divided basically into 3 sections. Okay? The third section is called A Harvest of Blood. Okay, it sounds awesome, it's not. That's the section I want you to give some extra attention to during your Thanksgiving break. Because we will have a reading quiz on it at the beginning of the period, next class period, which would be December 1st. Okay? Yeah.
Is this in the cram or in the...
This is in the textbook. Okay, yeah. Yes. Okay, so so I'm not so much of a quizzer. So when I do quiz, I want to make sure you know exactly what my expectation is, and it's that section. It's the third section. It's called A Harvest of Blood. It's in chapter 16 in the textbook. Yeah.
Is it going to be like multiple choice or like?
It's going to be whatever I want it to be at that moment. Okay. So maybe a multiple choice, maybe a short answer. I've got a couple different things in my mind. Okay. Scary, no? I see the smile.
How many points would it be?
I don't know. It's not meant to be the entire semester grade is going to be based on whether or not you do well on this quiz. It is meant to, however, encourage you to read. Does that make sense? All right. So we're beginning a new unit. Now, I didn't put up a unit title because a unit title is kind of difficult for this unit. It's kind of a mixed bag. But if I were to give this unit a title, I would call it the awkward adolescent phase of American history. Okay, it's a period of huge transition for the United States. We're no longer the young little new nation trying to figure things out. But we're also not yet the modern nation that basically helps win World War II. Okay, it's not that nation, it's not the young nation, it's the one that's going from there to there. It's in its transitional phase. And so it is a period of change, it's a period of growth, it's a period of not understanding kind of ourselves. It's a huge gold mine for AP test writers when they're trying to figure out, oh, I want a change over time question. I want something that demonstrates cause and effect. They go to this section of American history because there's so much change. Does that make sense? Yeah.
What's the whole time period for this?
It's basically from 1877, maybe a little bit before, to 1900, and in many ways, maybe all the way to 1914. 1914 is kind of really the United States becoming modern nation by entering into World War I. Okay? So we'll approach this time period somewhat thematically. We're going to be talking about the West. We're going to be talking about industry and urbanization. We're going to be talking about the politics and corruption. We're going to talk about reform. And then we're going to talk about the United States entering the world stage, kind of becoming a player in the world. Imperialism. Okay? So the first of these is our final kind of grabbing of manifest destiny. The territory has been grabbed, at least most of it. Now, it's conquering it, integrating it, making it part of the United States. And well, one of the things that means is that third section that I'm pointing you to is going to be about who's in the way. Who is it going to be that has to, in effect, lose in order for the United States to, for lack of a better term, win? Okay. It starts with a vision of this new Republican Party. And when the Republicans ran for office in 1860, they had really kind of created more of a philosophy. Then in 1856 it was, we're against the extension of slavery into the territories. 1860 they had a plan. 1860 it was, we were going to do big railroads, we're going to do a tariff, we're going to expand the economy. Okay, big plan. And actually, because of the Civil War, they will accomplish this early part of their vision. The Civil War helps the Republicans achieve the early part of their vision. Why? Because who was against many of the ideas that the Republicans had? Who would have been most against what the Republicans wanted? The Confederates of the South. And so, awkwardly or ironically, or I'm not even sure what the best word to use here is, the fact that the South seceded from the Union gives the Republicans the power to do everything they want to do. Since they're not there to object, to prevent from happening in the Senate and stuff like that, the Republicans get to go, hey, we want to do this. And so the Republicans, during the Civil War, are going to reshape the power of the federal government. The Republicans are going to implement ideas of big government that in effect date back to Alexander Hamilton and Henry Clay. Alexander Hamilton and Henry Clay had both been, we need a stronger central government. Well, without the South there to say, no, states' rights, no. The Republicans are able to basically take Alexander Hamilton's ideas and Henry Clay's ideas, give them steroid injections, and go, oh, now we got big banking system. Okay, big banking, okay? You want internal improvement? I give you railroad from coast to coast, okay? Protective tariff, you thought this one was the tariff of abominations? Oh my God, you have not met the new tariff. Big government power. And again, one of the main reasons they can do it is because the South had left the Union. They were not there to say no. The Republicans will continue this after the Civil War. And they're able to do this still because of Reconstruction. But after the Civil War, it was not as easy. After the Civil War, they run into a roadblock, which isn't the South. It's the economy. In 1873, there was a worldwide depression. It will create in the United States the largest depression in American history to that point. That will soon be displaced by the new largest one, which would happen in 1893, and then the still largest one, which is the great, terrible but great Depression of 1929. The Depression is going to limit the Republicans. They're not going to be as powerful in the 1870s as they had been in the 1860s. But even a less powerful Republican would still be able to create a massive public-private partnership as far as building things like internal improvements. And when I say public-private partnership, remember back the old Republicans? The old Jeffersonian ones, they did this thing where the National Republicans talked about neo-mercantilism, where it's private but it's given a push from the federal government. Well, that's kind of what these new Republicans are going to do. It's about making, we want stuff to be done by private industry, but the government will give it a push, will give it some aid. So it's not laissez-faire, it's not hands-off, it's government pushing the economy. This pushing will help create the seeds for the emergence of the United States as the most powerful industrial nation in the world. In the world. Speaking of the world, the Civil War also created kind of a change toward the United States and its position kind of on the world stage. Before the Civil War, when they're having kind of worldwide, who are the countries you talk to, who are the countries we don't care what they say, the United States was in the, we don't care what they say, they're just the Americans. But the Civil War, kind of accidentally, helped improve the United States' position in world diplomatic relations. And what this thing, the event that does it, is kind of a mistake that was made by the British. You see, the British, during the Civil War, was building ships for the Confederacy. Now, this would have been illegal under international law, okay, if the British had been building warships. So what the British did is they built just not warships. They would create these ironclads. Okay, so everybody think of like a Navy ship, okay? Everyone think of it, can everyone kind of picture in your mind a Navy ship? Now just take the guns off of that Navy ship. It's still kind of a Navy ship, isn't it? Well, this is what the British were doing. They were building a ship that was an ironclad, basically armored so that if you fired at it, it doesn't sink. But they didn't put guns on it. And so they'd say, hey, that's not a warship, it's just a ship. And they built several of these ships, most notably a ship known as the CSS Alabama for the Confederacy. The United States vigorously objected, said this is wrong, you can't be building these types of ships. It's a violation of international law. Well, the British kept doing it until 1863. In 1863, the United States wins the Battle of Gettysburg and Vicksburg. And suddenly, they stopped doing it. They had a contract to build some ships for the Confederacy, some additional ironclads, and they canceled the deals. What does, in effect, canceling those deals admit? If you were doing it before, and you said it was okay, but now all of a sudden you're not building these ships anymore, What in effect have you admitted about these ships? That they were warships. And the United States basically uses this as evidence that the British had been violating international law by building ironclads for the Confederacy. And what the British will do to basically get away from us criticizing them and declaring that they were breaking international law is they agreed to settle with us. They agreed to a $15.5 million settlement where they were basically compensating the United States for damages that were incurred by the CSS Alabama. Okay? So in other words, Pipsqueak Little America just got Britain to pay. What does that do with your kind of position on the world stage if you get the biggest, most powerful country in the world to pay up $15.5 million to you? What does that do with you, with other people kind of looking at you? Yeah. Just see what I just did? Uh-huh. Okay. It makes the United States a player. Okay? The United States is now a player on the world stage. This is huge. This is huge. Now, by the way, Charles Sumner proposed that we tell Britain that they can just simply pay off this debt by giving us Canada. Okay, so that's what he's saying. It didn't happen, obviously, but no, it was out there. We can credit a couple of people for helping this shift or rise in American diplomatic relations. One was the American ambassador to Great Britain at the time, and that was Charles Francis Adams. Charles Francis Adams, the son of Jacob. The other, okay, John Quincy Adams. The other was Secretary of State William Seward. And William Seward will remain Secretary of State under Andrew Johnson. So during that whole period of Andrew Johnson and his weak Reconstruction policy, you still had Republican William Seward running the State Department. And so it's still kind of the Republican vision on running our international relations during the entire Johnson administration. What Seward will bring to the State Department is an attitude that will be followed by later Republican presidents. The attitude was one that had to do with Latin America. In the past, the way that people kind of thought of dominance or dominating countries, you take them over. That's how you dominate a country. But William Seward, he figures out, do you actually have to go that far? Do you actually have to invade and control a country in order to dominate it? And he figured out, no, you don't. What did the United States have? It has this new industrial capacity. And Latin America didn't. And so what we would become is the kind of industrial goods supplier to Latin America. Say, here, do you want our cool manufactured goods? You get them hooked. You get them addicted to American manufactured goods. And all of a sudden, you're dominating their economies. Later, we're going to call this economic imperialism. And this idea pretty much, or the implementation of this idea, pretty much began with Secretary of State William Seward. Second thing that Seward did is he's going to strike a deal with China. Now the deal was largely to protect American missionaries in China, but it had a secondary thing that was hugely important to the Republican vision. What it called for were terms for immigration of Chinese laborers to the United States. Well, how's that important to the Republican vision? Well, one of the things was building an intercontinental railroad. Who do you think the laborers would be to build that transcontinental railroad from the Pacific eastward? It was Chinese laborers. The final thing that Seward does to kind of show this kind of shift in American attitudes. Russia and Great Britain were kind of feuding over Alaska, its boundaries, the presence of the Russians, and all that sort of stuff. And so what William Seward says to the Russians, I hear you're having a problem. Well, we can take that problem off your hands. $7.2 million, and we'll make that problem go away. We'll buy Alaska from you. Now, when Seward makes this proposal, it went into that point and laugh club thing, you know? People would go, bah! He wants to buy Alaska! Seward's icebox! Turned out, okay, that Alaska had this funny yellow metal in it that proved to be quite valuable. It had this black liquid stuff that also turned out to be quite valuable. And Seward's icebox turns out to be steel. Yeah?
Did he know all this before he got this?
No, he didn't. He didn't know. He lucked into it. It was.
Why did he want to buy that?
Well, because he wanted to expand American territory. Did this expand American territory? Yes, it did. Okay. It just turned out to be an awesome expansion, especially of the American wealth. Okay. The Republicans are also going to integrate the national economy. And the biggest way they are going to integrate the national economy is with railroads. Now, the United States was building railroads right around the same time that European countries were building railroads across their nations. And European countries, for the most part, when they were building their railroads, the government was paying for them. The government was owning and operating the railroads. The United States didn't want to play that way. The United States wanted the building of railroads to be done by private firms. The problem is private industry did not really want to build railroads. The problem with railroad building is that where they were going to be building the railroads was basically out of here into, well, for them, space. People didn't live here. And what makes money for railroads? People. And so you're basically telling, I want you to build a railroad to a place where nobody is. And companies go, I don't want to do that. And so what the United States government is going to do is it's going to encourage the building of railroads by basically giving to private companies loans, subsidies, will pay for part of it, and thirdly, and perhaps the most important thing they're going to give to the railroads to build these railroads, is land. And this turns out to be fairly genius, yes. Government and genius, same sentence without a not. What the government was basically doing is giving land that if nobody's living there, it's far away from where everybody's living. How expensive is that land? It's It's cheap, cheap land. So we're basically going to give to the railroad, here's cheap, cheap land. Now, the railroad probably would go, what? But once you build a railroad to that land, what all of a sudden happens to the value of that land? Yeah, it's almost like self-fulfilling. I'm going to give you cheap land, but if you build a railroad to it, all of a sudden what happens to the value of that land? It goes up. And if they sell that land, they can make the money. Okay? So it's something that the government had a lot of, or at least claimed a lot of, cheap, cheap land in the West. And they basically would say, here's the cheap, cheap land, make it valuable, build railroads. Now, the government even did something that was even more genius. Yes, government, more genius, same sentence. They didn't give all the land to the railroads. I want you to all think in your mind, picture a checkerboard. Okay, so you know how some spots on the checkerboard one color, other spots on the checkerboard other color? Well, give one color spots on the checkerboard to the railroads. Keep the others. What happened now to the land, now once the railroads built to your checkerboard? What just happened to the land that you kept? What happened to the value of it? It went up. And now when you sell that land, what do you do? What do you get? The money. So it turned out to be a fairly cheap, in the long run, way of subsidizing or government helping pay for the building of a transcontinental railroad. It is this is the public-private blend that the Republicans were kind of famous for in this period. Yes, sir?
Are we still doing that system today?
Do know. Because all the public lands are pretty much, well, certainly not for building railroads. We're actually retracting on railroads as opposed to expanding on railroads. But who still owns a lot of that land? Who do you know who is the second largest owner of land in all of the United States? Are the railroads. The first, of course, is the United States. Okay. Anyway, this is if you're looking for evidence. What happened? Was there a change? Well, in 1865, there was about 35,000 miles of railroads in the United States. By 1900, we will have almost 193,000 miles. That is more miles of track in the United States than all of Europe, all European countries combined. This turned out to be a very effective way of expanding. Now, a little prelude for that section which we're going to do when we get back from Thanksgiving break. All of this land that is expanding for the railroads, all of this land that is being sold, you're having to move people out of the way. So you need to remember that anytime any of this stuff that we're talking about is expanding westward, it's going to be at someone's expense. The other thing that the railroads are going to do is they're going to help transform American capitalism. You see, most railroads will start using a business practice, which before this point it had been relatively uncommon. But after the railroads can expand and utilize this system, it becomes far more common. It becomes a very common way of doing business in this time period, the 1870s on. And that is incorporation. So I don't know what a corporation is versus what it is that most businesses were before this point. what is a corporation? What is
Is
corporation?
a corporation kind of pooling risks and
It definitely is pooling risk, but it's pooling risk in a certain way. So you're absolutely right about it being a pooling of risk. Okay, so here, I'll do a quick example of what corporation is and what system it kind of replaced. So let's say there are 3 different ways. There's more, but let's say there are 3 different ways that you can have a company. You can have a sole proprietorship. So Ryan Company, he owns his own company, operates his own company. He is responsible for everything that happens in that company. That company does well, he gets all the money. If it crashes, he is 100% liable for everything. So if it owes debts, if it owes fines, everything, you're 100% liable. If the sale of the business doesn't pay for it, they can take your house, your car, your kids, everything to pay off that debt. Okay. A secondary system, and this was the one, this is another way of pooling resources, is a partnership. Okay? So let's say that Chris and Nick create a partnership. Okay. What's good about that is they've all bought in a share of the company. They all bring their resources to the company, so there's more money used to start this company. The problem is that, once again, liability. Every single partner is 100% liable for everything that goes wrong in the company. So let's say that Nick dies, sorry, and right before payroll, okay, Chris notices that there's this huge amount of money in the company safe. And he goes, oh. And he takes all that money and he goes to Rio. Who is now 100% responsible for everything in the company? Nick. Even though he didn't take the money, since his name is on the company, he is 100% liable. He has to sell off all his assets, everything, to try and pay it off. Got it? It's a risk of partnership.
That's a corporation.
No, that's a partnership. A corporation does it differently. What you do with a corporation is you sell shares, or like tiny little percentages of your company. Okay? Usually you do it in what we call like a stock market or something like that. Now when you buy that tiny little percentage of the company, you technically do own whatever that amount is that was sold to you. So let's say, just to make it simple, I bought 1% of a company. That entitles me to like 1% of the profits. And so when they pay out the dividends, I would make this share of dividends based on my percentage of the company. But let's say the company fails. Let's say that I had bought that share for $5,000. The company's now going under. How much do I lose? $5,000. That's it. It's called limited liability. And the only thing that you lose or stand to lose is exactly how much money you put in. And so you can think about it. So, Nick, do you want to get into many partnerships anymore now that you got burned? Okay. But you have some cash when you rebuilt. Well, wait a minute. I can take that cash and I can invest it into a corporation. My only risk is that exact money. It is not anything additional. Yeah?
What about like the founder or CEO of the corporation?
CEO is only at risk as much percentage of stock, whatever they paid into the company, once they turned it into a corporation. Founder, well, if it was founded and remained in private hands, then it is not a corporation. Then they are liable. But as soon as they turn it into a corporation and sell off the shares, even if they sign over half of the shares to themselves, they are only responsible for that percentage of the debt, the whatever. Does that make sense? Okay. This change, this in effect changes everything. Most major companies will now be using corporations as their fundamental organization system. This time period, you can basically call it the rise of the corporations. So the railroads, these are some of the big areas where they gave land grants. I have no idea what they were doing right here. This picture shows the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad, where the railroad from the east meets the railroad from the west at Promontory Point, Utah. This was in 1869. In 1869, the two sides came together. The other thing that kind of evolves from here that I want to kind of put a picture into your head is just how powerful these railroad corporations became. This political cartoonist is characterizing the Senate as in effect a roundhouse. What's a roundhouse? Well, that's where Thomas the Tank Engine goes home to sleep at night. Okay, and that in effect that what had the Senate become is a place of the railroads, by the railroads, and for the railroads. People not included. Okay. The second big change that the Republicans implement is high tariffs. They are going to implement protective tariffs, big tariff walls, to protect American industries. And some of the industries will be new. One of the new industries to take off at this time is steel, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that later. They're also going to protect older industries, like textiles, okay? Protecting American textiles against particularly the British. But these Republicans did not only care about these Eastern manufacturers. They also cared about some of the newer industries that were emerging in the more farm-oriented West. So they're going to put high tariffs on sugar to protect a Western sugar beet industry. They're going to put high tariffs on wool to protect a sheep herding industry. So this was basically looking at what were the important industries to the American economy and putting up big tariff walls to allow them to develop, grow, and, yes, dominate. Besides the giant, big protective tariffs, the Republicans are also going to have smaller tariffs on other things that are imported by American consumers. As the United States got wealthier during this time, more and more things will be imported into the United States as consumer goods. And this tariff on goods that we're importing, tax on goods that we're importing, was the main way we paid for the expenses of government at this time. These tariffs will help pay off the debt from the Civil War. Additionally, so much tariff money was coming into the United States in the 1880s. The United States was actually running yearly budget, it's a new word, surpluses. Surplus. Surplus, meaning they had more money coming in than they needed. Surplus. In fact, they were running such high surpluses that the Republicans got worried that the Democrats would try and lower the tariffs. So what they did is they basically challenged themselves to basically spend every last nickel. They were tariff and spend Republicans. In the 1880s, they will have what we call the $1 billion Congress, the very first Congress to spend $1 billion. I know we now spend that like now. Okay, now. But back then, okay, $1 billion was actually a lot of money. Yeah. So one was a giant subsidy of the sugar industry. They paid for every pound of sugar that any American sugar grower grew, they would pay them a penny. So just for growing it, you received the money. So they did things like that to basically, again, help improve American business. Yeah?
What were like the conflicts and politics after the Civil War? Like,
Well, hold that thought. Because one of them is... What? The tariff. Okay. The Republicans, okay, the Republicans are going to argue with the Democrats over these high tariffs. The Republicans argued that A, the tariff, obviously it's there to protect American industry, that's its purpose. They have a second argument. Their second argument for a high tariff is that whenever you raise tariffs, it also would mean higher wages. And they would show these tariff schedules where they could see, we raised the tariff and no, wages went up. Hey, we raised the tariff and no, wages went up. And so they basically did this tie. Every time tariffs went up, wages went up, and that's good for American workers. They argued that higher wages meant less child labor, that it meant fewer women needed to work, and it was actually preventing the type of industrial poverty that you would find in Europe. In Europe, when you think of European industry, you think of all the poor workers, you think of Oliver Twist, it's all sad, okay? But not in America, because we have a high tariff. That's their argument. The Democrats argue back, wait a minute. Higher tariffs mean no Walmart. Higher tariffs mean that you can't get the cheap consumer goods. Higher tariff means you have to pay more money for the stuff you want to buy. The other thing Democrats argued was that even though the Republicans say it's all roses and honey and fabulous things for American workers, it's not. Workers rarely saw the benefits of high tariffs. You know who saw the benefits of high tariffs? Corporations saw the benefits of high tariffs. There's only 2 periods in American history where we see this massive growth of wealth among the truly top wealthy people in America. One of those times is this point in American history. The other time is now. Okay? Yeah?
What did you say was now and then?
Take your top 1% and just kind of their expanse of their wealth then and now. The 2 times where the top most echelon people in the American economy are just winning like gangbusters. In other words, what the Democrats are saying is that the workers aren't actually getting all the benefits. Now, this is one of those tricky things. Okay, so everybody have to keep your eye on the ball here. It is probably true that if you took the American worker and you compared them to the European worker, the American worker was doing better. But here's the thing. Was better actually good? And that's the point. That's the trick. Is that just because it was better just not as bad. In other words, it's crappy, just not as crappy. But it's better. You got it? Corporations will end up pretty much dominating. Many of these corporations will end up dominating whole sectors of the economy. During this time, Rockefeller and his oil companies would end up controlling 97% of all refined oil in America. Carnegie and his steel would control at least a third of all steel production in the United States. You have these corporations that were just massively powerful. It will be the states that try to step in and regulate these corporations. It will be the states. Federal government, not so much. Why? Because who's controlling most of the policies of the federal government? Republicans are. The states, however, will try to regulate these corporations. And at first, the United States Supreme Court will side with the states. In 1877, in a case called Munn versus Illinois, the United States Supreme Court will rule that states do have the ability to regulate corporations. But in 1886, the United States Supreme Court is going to make another decision that makes this 1877 decision pretty much weak. In 1886, in a case called Santa Clara County versus the Southern Pacific Railway, the United States Supreme Court will rule that the 14th Amendment, citizenship, protections, apply to corporations. In other words, this is a decision that in effect peopleizes corporations. Corporations are people too, at least according to the United States Supreme Court. This means they have the right, quote, to free speech, they have the right to freedom of expression, they have the right to freedom of religion, okay? They enjoy these rights. By extending 14th Amendment protections to corporations, it will in effect shield these corporations from excessive regulations. This is still an issue today. Corporations basically claiming right to free speech. Well, the court in the past has equated a campaign donation to speech. That is you exercising your right to free speech by donating to a campaign. And so if the government tries to put a limitation on a corporation as far as the amount of money they donate to a politician. It is limiting that corporation's right to free speech. Okay? Yes?
What did you say, Munn versus Illinois rule?
Munn versus Illinois gave states the ability to regulate corporations.
Oh, okay.
But what Santa Clara does
Yeah, I
is it basically weakens what types of regulations you can do.
The Supreme Court ruled Munn versus...
Both. Both these cases are Supreme Court cases.
Okay.
So you just kind of think of it as this way. A, yes, states can regulate, but they are limited in the types of regulation they can do. Get it? Okay. When I started this off today, I said that this is a transitional unit as far as making kind of what the United States is today, how it is formed, why it is what it is. Here is a major, major thing. Okay? The power and strength of a corporation today, in many ways, owes to this decision. The last major area of change that the Republicans are going to bring will be about money. The British were the first nation to start basing its money supply on gold. We call this the gold standard. The idea is that here it is that they are a country that has trades all over the world. They want everybody to know that their money is valuable no matter where they are. And so they say you can always count on the British pound because the British pound is backed by gold. The Republicans under Ulysses Grant decide that they are going to join the British in this belief. That they're basically joining because it would help create standard measurement of currencies internationally. That basically now you can look at the pound and you can also look at the dollar. And woohoo! We all know, no matter where you are in the world, the pound and the dollar, okay, are valuable because they are backed by gold. The United States did this largely because as a developing nation, we are trying to get investment from overseas. And who's one of the big investors that we want? Britain. Okay? So if we're all on the same page economically, it makes it easier for you to invest. Come on, give me money. Money, 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 by the pound. Okay? To do this, the United States will pass the Coinage Act of 1873. Many people call it the crime of 1873. What this law did, the United States will cease minting silver dollars. Why? Because then your money would be what? Silver, not gold. So its intrinsic value would be based on silver, not gold. So we can't have silver money. Only gold dollars now. Secondly, remember how during the Civil War, Salmon Chase had printed up a whole bunch of money saying that it's valuable just because the United States government says it's okay? Well, we're just going to stop doing that. We're going to start pulling all that money out of circulation so that all money out there is now money that is backed by gold. We'll say it right on the money. Okay? This money can be exchanged for gold. It's gold money. Valuable money. Why was this considered to be a crime? Because it is going to cause a condition known as deflation. Now, I know you probably heard, no, Mr. King, inflation's bad, so deflation must be good. No, deflation bad. In fact, some people argue even worse. Now, how could that be true? I mean, here I have money. See the pile of money? Everybody see the pile of money? That pile of money is now gathering value. You just stare at the money, and it's more. It's more. This is awesome. I love my money. I just stare at it. It becomes more money. Yay. This is awesome. But here's the problem. There's only one real group that really loves the fact that the money is gaining valuable all the time. Those are the people that have the money. If you're a money haver, you love just sitting there watching your money grow. Don't even have to water it. But most Americans are not money havers. Most Americans are money debtors. I'm a debtor. I owe thousands of dollars in a mortgage. Okay? For my house. So now let's reverse this. Instead of this being my money pile, let's make it my debt pile. I owe this amount of money. And now I'm staring at my money that I owe. And what's happening to the money that I owe? Stop! No! Okay, and how about the money to pay it back? Is it easy for me to earn the money to pay it back? Or is it now harder because of deflation? It's harder because of deflation. So not only is my debt growing, but my ability to pay back the debt is getting harder and harder and harder. Okay. The saying was, deflation dooms a debtor. Most Americans, what are they? The crime of 1873. It sets up this struggle between hard money advocates, which some people would have a simple word for them, the rich, and debtors, the poor, who would like to have some inflation. For a debtor, massive inflation is actually awesome because you pay off your debts with cheaper money. But at worst, you would like the economy to be somewhat the same. You would like to just be able to pay off your debt and not have to pay off the debt. Okay, yeah?
What's the difference between hard money and soft money?
So hard money is money based on an intrinsic thing like gold. Soft would be like the greenback, where the money value is that the government said that it's valuable. Because, remember, the government really liked this during the Civil War because it didn't have the money, but it had expenses. So it just printed some and said, yeah, here, that's good. Okay? It was okay because the Union did it sparingly. It killed the Confederacy, though, because they had massive inflation. Okay. So do you guys, can you see this struggle? And this is, in answer to your question, one of the arguments. Republicans were often on the side of big money here. And the Democrats, remember the common man Democrats, are going to be against this. Okay? Two reactions. So if you want to put that these are reactions. In 1878, there'll be a political party created simply demanding inflation. it was called the Greenback Labor Party. And 14 members of this party are elected to Congress, and what do they do in Congress? Inflation! Give us inflation, please! Okay, print us some money. We want inflation. Another reaction was the Bland-Allison Act of 1878. And what this act did is it called for limited coinage of silver. We are going to start minting some silver dollars again. Now this is small, limited. Note the word limited. Guess who demanded this and why it got passed? Do you think it was the people? How about silver miners? In Nevada, there was a huge silver strike, the Comstock lode. And they have all the silver. They can't really sell it because the government isn't really interested in silver because they're only interested in gold. So they put pressure and got past the Bland-Allison Act so that the government starts buying up some silver so that it can make the money. Got it? This political cartoon kind of pictures the attitudes toward the passage of these pro-gold or not passing an inflation bill. What it shows President Grant, now back in Army uniform, with his sword in hand, defending, and these are the virtues of the Republic. And who is he defending the virtues of the Republic from? The inflationists. And interestingly enough, what type of uniform do inflationists have a tendency to wear? Mary, did you know that? Traitors, those inflationists, one and all. Democrat inflationists, traitors. So now let's bring it on home. Okay, you guys, I kind of pounded a whole bunch at you, but it's all been one theme. Okay, so let's bring it on home. The Republican policies, what did they bring? Well, they help bring exuberant growth. The United States expands dramatically as far as its economy during this time. Republican policies also brought about the railroads and telegraphs that helped tie the economy together. And they set up the United States to become the industrial nation that it's going to become. However, what I would like you to do right now is take a look back at this vision. And I want you to grade it, assess it, give it a grade. And then give me two, not just one, but two explanations. I want one, compliment to what the Republicans had done, and then one critique. And so you can reverse this if you want to have a negative grade. You can say back it up with a critique, but then you also have to give a compliment. You can give an assessment that is good with a compliment, but then you also have to give a critique. You can give a negative assessment, critique, but you also have to add a compliment. Bless you.
Everybody's going to be staring at each other tomorrow. Nobody wants to be here tomorrow. the passage of that coinage act is considered to be the crime of 1873, because what did it cost? So if you're poor, by basically taking money out of circulation and causing inflation, so hurting whom?
All right, so finish that sentence you read. Nothing's causing, it's causing deflation because you're taking money out of the economy, just your everyday money. Welcome.
Hi, can I sit there for like
Is that
10 minutes
Eurostat?
and do your history book?
Was that Eurostat?
Did it work? Are you licensed?
Yeah, I made one mistake. She said I was driving, so I said,
But that was okay overall.
Yeah, I guess so.
Congratulations. Got a license. All right, so given that the gold standard was based on Britain, why don't you go find your Big Ben and talk about this Republican cause?
It's time for something to watch.
You're at. Talk to me. Okay, so what grade you giving yourself? And uniting. Okay, so that's possible stealing, huh? Usurp it. I'll usurp it. All right. Go on home desk. Home desk. Home desk. Home desk. All right. So. Got a better random number generator. It's called RNG. There you go.
There you go.
Okay, so. All right. This one can generate 6 for me all at once. Okay, so speaking of 6, what do you think?
So I gave the C
Mhm.
because the Republicans didn't really need to like harm the economy, they just wanted to make it better. But then on the other side, the Republicans were like for mostly because they were for the working people. But lately they've been protecting more like the richer. So yeah.
Okay, cool. 10. Maria?
I gave it a B because the Republicans elevated the United States' economic power internationally while bolstering domestic industries and growth, but it failed to consider the majority of Americans' economic conditions by passing the Coinage Act, which caused deflation and increased the value that American debtors owe.
Excellent. Okay. 16. Chloe?
I also gave it a B because that it
through like the railroads and just like it became more industrialized and became a greater power and connected the U.S. more, but it made the poor like it increased the debt of the poor, and it just helped the rich and it didn't really consider the poor.
And 20. Kevin.
I gave them a C because the policies tied together the country and gave people generally better conditions, but they also created deflation, so that like increased the differences between the social classes.
Awesome. You guys, snaps all around. All right, so I'm one slide behind, so I owe you an additional slide next time. But have a fabulously wonderful Thanksgiving break. Don't forget 16, third section.